Martha Sullivan dropped her morning coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against her porch steps as she watched the skeletal figure collapse on Main Street. The German shepherd's ribs jutted through matted fur like prison bars, his once powerful frame reduced to nothing but bones and determination. It wasn't just another stray dog, it was Sergeant Rex. Mrs. Henderson's grocery bags scattered across the sidewalk, canned goods rolling into the street as she stumbled backward. Children on bicycles skidded to a halt, their laughter dying in their throats. The morning air filled with gasps and whispered prayers. Martha's weathered hands trembled against the porch railing, remembering the proud K-9 officer who'd marched in last year's Memorial Day parade. Now he lay motionless, those intelligent brown eyes still searching the crowd for a face that would never come home. "Someone call Bobby Ray," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Call him now." What had happened to Cedar Falls' hero? And why did he look like he'd been wandering through hell itself? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Cedar Falls, Iowa had always been the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbor's middle name and Sunday dinner invitations were extended through kitchen windows. With a population of 3,247, nestled between endless cornfields and the lazy Cedar River, it was a town where time moved like honey and secrets were harder to keep than Christmas presents. The old grain elevator stood sentinel over Main Street, its weathered wood bearing witness to 4 generations of farmers, teachers, and the occasional dreamer who stayed instead of leaving for Des Moines. Martha Nana Sullivan had called Cedar Falls home for 74 years, teaching 3rd grade for 43 of them before retiring to a life of church committees and 2 quiet evenings. Her white clapboard house on Elm Street had sheltered 5 children, though only memories remained since her husband Samuel passed, and her youngest, Bobby Ray, fled town 15 years ago after words too harsh to take back. The front porch where she'd rocked babies to sleep now served as her watchtower over a neighborhood growing older and emptier each year. 3 blocks away, Earl "Pops" McKenzie maintained his daily ritual of coffee at 0600 hours sharp, a habit carried over from Vietnam and 40 years at the John Deere plant. At 79, his body bore the weight of Agent Orange and a cancer diagnosis he'd shared with no one except his doctor in Waterloo. The garage behind his modest ranch house had become his sanctuary, filled with half-finished woodworking projects and memories of brothers in arms who'd never made it home. Earl's hands, gnarled by arthritis and time, still moved with precision when working with his tools or reaching for the Purple Heart he kept hidden in his workbench drawer. The town's quiet rhythm had been shattered 8 months earlier when Officer Tommy Hayes died in a fiery car crash during a high-speed pursuit. His K-9 partner, Sergeant Rex, had vanished that night despite searches organized by the volunteer fire department and the local American Legion post. Tommy's brother Clayton, known to everyone as Clay, had closed ranks around the tragedy, offering few details beyond the official report that blamed bad weather and mechanical failure. Bobby Ray Whitman had built his veterinary practice 200 miles away in Springfield, Missouri, telling himself the distance was about opportunity, not the argument that drove him from his mother's dinner table all those years ago. At 42, he'd carved out a successful life treating suburban pets and agricultural animals, but his mother's voice on the answering machine still made his chest tighten with guilt he couldn't quite shake. Now, as Rex lay dying on the same street where Tommy had grown up throwing footballs and chasing fireflies, these separate lives were about to collide in ways none of them could imagine. The German shepherd's labored breathing carried the weight of 8 months' worth of secrets, and Cedar Falls was about to learn that some truths were worth dying for. The crowd gathered around Rex like mourners at a funeral, their hushed voices creating a semicircle of uncertainty. Martha pushed through the growing throng, her orthopedic shoes clicking against the hot asphalt as she knelt beside the collapsed German shepherd. His breathing came in shallow pants, each exhale a whispered plea for mercy that cut through her heart like a rusted blade. "Nobody touch him," Clay Hayes barked, his work boots heavy on the pavement as he shouldered past the Henderson twins. At 47, Tommy's older brother carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to being heard, his mechanic's coveralls stained with grease and something darker that Martha couldn't quite identify. "That dog's been running wild for months. Could have rabies. Could have anything." Mrs. Henderson clutched her pearls, stepping back instinctively. "Oh, my lord, Clay's right. What if he bites someone? What if he's sick?" "He's not sick," Martha said quietly, her weathered fingers hovering inches from Rex's matted fur. "He's starving." The dog's ribs protruded like the slats of a broken fence, and his once glossy coat hung in patches, revealing raw skin beneath. His eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, still held the intelligent alertness that had made him Tommy's perfect partner. Clay's jaw tightened. "Martha, I'm telling you to step away from that animal. He's dangerous. Always was, even when Tommy was alive. That dog's the reason my brother's dead." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Martha's head snapped up, her blue eyes blazing with the same fire that had once intimidated fourth graders into proper grammar. "Clayton Hayes, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and I've heard plenty of nonsense in my 74 years. "You weren't there," Clay shot back, his voice rising above the murmur of onlookers. "You didn't see what I saw." Tommy was so worried about that damn dog getting hurt in the chase, he took his eyes off the road, wrapped his cruiser around an oak tree because he was more concerned about a mutt than his own safety. Earl Mackenzie emerged from the crowd, his Vietnam veteran's cap casting shadows over his weathered face. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he'd learned to navigate hostile territory decades ago. "That's not how I remember Tommy talking about his partner," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd seen real combat. "Said that dog saved his life more than once." "Well, Tommy's not here to tell his side of the story, is he?" Clay's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And neither of you were in that car when it happened." Martha felt Rex's breathing grow more labored beneath her palm. The dog's eyes found hers, and she saw something that made her heart clench. Not just physical pain, but a soul-deep loneliness that mirrored her own empty evenings. "Earl, help me get him to some shade," she whispered. "Nobody's moving that dog anywhere." Clay stepped forward, his shadow falling across Rex's prone form. "I'm calling animal control. They'll put him down humanely, which is more mercy than he deserves." "Over my dead body." Martha rose to her feet with surprising grace, placing herself between Clay and Rex. The crowd held its breath, sensing the electricity in the air. "This dog served our community faithfully for 3 years. He deserves better than being put down like a criminal." Clay's face flushed red. "That dog killed my brother." "Grief makes people say foolish things," Earl said quietly, but his words carried across the silent street. "I've buried enough good soldiers to know that guilt and anger can twist a man's memory." "You calling me a liar, old man?" "I'm saying grief's a hell of a thing. Makes us see enemies where there ain't none." Martha knelt again, gently stroking Rex's head. The dog's tail gave the faintest twitch of recognition, and tears she hadn't expected burned her eyes. "Someone needs to call Bobby Ray. This boy needs medical attention." "Your son ran off 15 years ago, Martha. Why would he come back for a dog?" "Because," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion she'd kept buried for too long, "sometimes what we think we're saving ends up saving us." The crowd began to disperse as Clay stalked away, muttering threats about animal control and liability. But Earl remained, along with a handful of others who remembered Tommy Hayes as more than just another tragedy. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across Main Street, Rex's labored breathing became the only sound that mattered. Martha pulled out her ancient cell phone with trembling fingers, scrolling to a number she'd memorized but rarely called. Bobby Ray's answering machine picked up after 4 rings, and she found herself speaking to the void for the second time in a week. "Son, it's your mother. I need you to come home. There's something here that needs fixing, and I'm afraid I can't do it alone." Bobby Ray Whitman's hands trembled as he disconnected the call, his mother's voice still echoing in the cab of his pickup truck as he pulled into Cedar Falls for the first time in 15 years. The town looked smaller somehow, as if time had pressed it between the pages of a forgotten book. The water tower still bore the faded remnants of the class of '99's graduation prank, and Henderson's General Store maintained its crooked fresh bait sign that had been crooked since Bobby was in elementary school. He found them in Earl Mackenzie's garage behind the old man's ranch house on Maple Street. Martha sat on an overturned milk crate, her silver hair catching the afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows. Rex lay on a pile of moving blankets, his breathing shallow but steady, while Earl worked quietly at his workbench, giving them space but staying close enough to help if needed. "Hello, son," Martha said without looking up, her voice carrying the same gentle authority that had guided him through scraped knees and broken hearts 40 years ago. Bobby Ray knelt beside the German shepherd, his veterinarian's eye cataloging the damage. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, what looked like infected wounds on his paws from months of wandering on rough pavement. But it was the dog's eyes that stopped him cold. Intelligent, alert, and filled with a grief so profound, it seemed almost human. "How long has he been like this?" Bobby asked, his professional mask slipping as Rex's tail gave the faintest wag of recognition. "Found him this morning on Main Street," Earl said, not turning from his workbench where he was carefully organizing tools with military precision. "But I reckon he's been surviving on scraps and rainwater for months. Amazing he's still breathing." Bobby gently examined Rex's body, feeling the sharp angles of ribs beneath matted fur. "He's been through hell. Probably dropped 40 pounds since I last saw him at the Memorial Day parade." He paused, his throat tightening unexpectedly. "Remember how proud Tommy was that day?" Martha's hand found his shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you for coming home." "Mom, don't!" Bobby stood abruptly, the familiar weight of old arguments settling between them like dust. "I came for the dog, not for a reunion." "Did you?" Earl's voice was quiet, but it carried the same authority Bobby remembered from his childhood, when the old veteran would tell stories of Vietnam on summer evenings. "Because it seems to me like maybe this dog's been looking for something, and maybe you have too." Before Bobby could respond, footsteps echoed on the concrete driveway. Clay Hayes appeared in the doorway, his bulk blocking most of the afternoon light. His face was flushed, and his hands were clenched into fists that had seen plenty of use over the years. "I figured I'd find you here," Clay said, his eyes fixed on Rex. "Heard Bobby Ray was back in town. Come to see the dog that killed his old friend?" "Clay, that's enough." Martha stood, placing herself between the mechanic and Rex. "This dog never hurt anybody." "Tell that to my brother." Clay stepped into the garage, bringing with him the smell of motor oil and something else. Alcohol, Bobby realized. Day drinking wasn't like Clay, but then again, grief changed people in ways that couldn't be predicted. Bobby moved to stand beside his mother, surprised by the protective instinct that flared in his chest. "I examined him, Clay. This is a military-trained K9. They don't snap without provocation." "You calling me a liar?" Clay's voice rose, echoing off the garage walls. "I was there when they pulled Tommy out of that wreck. I saw what was left of my little brother, and I'm telling you that dog distracted him." Earl turned from his workbench, his movements slow and deliberate. "Clay, you weren't in that patrol car. None of us were. So maybe we ought to be careful about throwing accusations around." "I know what I know." Clay's jaw worked furiously. muscles bulging beneath his weathered skin. "And what I know is that dog's been nothing but trouble since the day Tommy partnered with him. Always too aggressive, too unpredictable. The department should have retired him years ago." Rex raised his head at the sound of Clay's voice, a low whine escaping his throat. But instead of fear or aggression, Bobby saw something else in the dog's eyes. Confusion, as if he couldn't understand why this human's voice carried such anger. "Look at him," Bobby said quietly. "Does that look like an aggressive dog to you?" "Looks like a dying dog to me," Clay shot back, "which is what he should be. Put him out of his misery and save everyone the trouble." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Martha gasped. Earl's tools clattered to the workbench, and even Rex seemed to shrink against the blankets. "Get out!" Earl's voice was deadly quiet, carrying the kind of authority that came from leading men in combat. "Get out of my garage, Clay Hayes, before I do something we'll both regret." "This isn't over." Clay pointed a thick finger at Rex. "That dog's a menace, and everyone in this town knows it. I won't let him hurt anyone else." As Clay's footsteps faded down the driveway, Bobby knelt beside Rex again, feeling the dog's rapid heartbeat beneath his palm. "It's okay, boy. You're safe here." But even as he spoke the words, Bobby wondered if they were true. Clay's anger ran deeper than grief. It was the kind of rage that festered in darkness, growing stronger with time instead of healing. And something in the man's eyes suggested this confrontation was only the beginning. Rex pressed his muzzle against Bobby's hand, and for the first time in 15 years, Bobby Ray Whitman felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Over the following weeks, an unlikely alliance formed in the shadows of Cedar Falls. Martha would arrive at Earl's garage each morning with thermoses of coffee and homemade biscuits, while Bobby Ray made the 40-minute drive from his temporary motel room in Waterloo twice daily to check on Rex's progress. The German Shepherd responded slowly to their care, his ribs gradually disappearing beneath new muscle, his coat beginning to show patches of its former glossy black. Earl had fashioned a comfortable bed from old moving blankets in the corner of his garage, positioning it where Rex could see anyone approaching while remaining hidden from the street. The old veteran worked quietly at his bench while Rex recovered, the rhythmic sound of sandpaper on wood creating a peaceful backdrop to the dog's healing sleep. Sometimes Martha would catch Earl talking to Rex in low tones, sharing stories about his own war dogs in Vietnam, men and animals who depended on each other for survival in ways civilians could never understand. "He's starting to trust again," Bobby observed during one of his evening visits, watching as Rex accepted a gentle ear scratch without flinching. "His appetite's improved, and the infection in his paws is clearing up. Physically, he's going to be fine." "And emotionally?" Martha asked, settling into her usual spot on the milk crate with a cup of Earl's surprisingly excellent coffee. Bobby's expression darkened. "That's going to take longer. He shows classic signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, startle responses, depression. Whatever happened the night Tommy died left scars that go deeper than malnutrition." Earl looked up from the small wooden cross he was carving, his weathered hands never pausing in their work. "Survivor's guilt. Seen it in enough good soldiers. They blame themselves for coming home when their buddies didn't." The truth of those words settled over them like dust. Rex's intelligent eyes held a depth of sorrow that seemed almost human, as if he understood that his survival had come at the cost of his partner's life. During quiet moments, he would stare toward the garage door with an expression of waiting, as though Tommy might walk through at any moment with a tennis ball and a smile. But their secret care arrangement couldn't remain hidden forever in a town where gossip traveled faster than the morning paper. Clay had been asking questions around town, checking with the hardware store about who was buying dog food, questioning the pharmacist about unusual veterinary supply purchases. His suspicions sharpened when he noticed Bobby Ray's truck parked regularly at Earl's house, and Martha's unusually frequent trips to the grocery store. The confrontation came on a humid Thursday evening in late July. Clay arrived at Earl's garage with Dale Morrison, the town's part-time animal control officer, whose day job as the insurance salesman made him more bureaucrat than enforcer. Dale clutched his clipboard like a shield, clearly uncomfortable with his assigned role but unwilling to challenge Clay's authority as the bereaved brother. "We know you're harboring that animal," Clay announced, his bulk filling the garage doorway. "Dale here's got legal authority to remove dangerous strays, and that includes dogs with a history of causing accidents." Earl didn't look up from his carving. "Don't recall inviting you onto my property, Clay." "We have reasonable suspicion," Dale said, consulting his clipboard with nervous energy. "Multiple reports of suspicious activity, unusual purchases consistent with animal care, and credible testimony regarding the location of the subject animal." Bobby Ray stepped forward, his veterinarian credentials lending weight to his words. "That dog isn't dangerous. And I've examined him thoroughly, and he shows no signs of aggression or behavioral problems." "Your professional opinion doesn't change the facts," Clay shot back. "Tommy's dead because of that animal, and I won't have him threatening anyone else in this town." Martha moved to stand beside Rex, who had risen at the sound of angry voices but remained calm, his training evident in his controlled response to the tension. "The only threat I see here is your determination to blame an innocent animal for a tragedy that had nothing to do with him." "Innocent?" Clay's laugh was bitter, tinged with 8 months of unprocessed grief. "That dog was supposed to protect Tommy, supposed to keep him safe. Instead, he got distracted, got sloppy, and my brother paid the price." "You weren't there." Earl's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd seen real combat. "None of us were." "So maybe we ought to be careful about rewriting history to fit our pain." Dale shifted uncomfortably, his clipboard now more burden than tool. "Look, folks, I don't want any trouble here, but I've got legal obligations and Mr. Hayes has filed a formal complaint about a dangerous animal. I need to at least inspect the premises." "Then inspect away." Earl gestured toward the garage interior. "But you'll find nothing more dangerous than an old man's woodworking tools and a dog that's been through hell but never lost his gentle heart." As Dale stepped into the garage, Rex moved closer to Martha, not in aggression but seeking comfort from the grandmother figure who'd shown him kindness when the world had turned cold. The gesture was so human, so clearly that of a creature seeking protection rather than offering threat, that even Dale's bureaucratic facade cracked slightly. "He seems pretty calm for a dangerous animal," Dale observed, making notes on his clipboard that seemed more for show than substance. "That's because he's not dangerous," Bobby said firmly. "He's a highly trained canine officer who's been traumatized by the loss of his partner. What you're seeing isn't aggression, it's grief." Clay's face flushed red. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze my brother's death. Tommy died because that dog failed to do his job." "What if you're wrong?" Martha's question hung in the air like smoke. "What if Tommy died protecting Rex, not because of him?" The suggestion hit Clay like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment Bobby thought the larger man might resort to violence. Instead, Clay turned on his heel and stalked toward the door. "This isn't over," he called back. "That dog's a menace, and I'll prove it." "Dale, you've got 48 hours to remove that animal, or I'll find someone who will." After the men left, the garage felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Rex pressed against Martha's leg, seeking reassurance, while Earl returned to his carving with hands that trembled slightly, whether from age or anger. Bobby couldn't tell. "He's not going to give up," Bobby said quietly. "Clay's got influence in this town, and grief makes people do stupid things." Martha's jaw set with the same determination that had carried her through 43 years of teaching third graders. "Then we'll have to be smarter than grief." "What are you thinking, Nana?" Bobby's use of his childhood name for her came naturally, the first time in 15 years he'd let those walls come down. "I'm thinking it's time to do some research," Martha said, scratching Rex behind the ears. "If Clay's so certain about what happened that night, then there should be records. Police reports, investigation files, maybe even dashcam footage." Earl looked up from his carving, his eyes sharp despite his 79 years. County Courthouse would have copies of the official investigation, and if Tommy was as good a cop as everyone says, he would have documented everything properly. "That's assuming Clay hasn't already thought of that," Bobby said. "He's had 8 months to cover his tracks, if there was anything to cover." "Maybe," Earl agreed. "But truth has a way of surfacing, especially when good people refuse to let it stay buried." As the evening shadows lengthened, Rex settled onto his blanket with a contentment that had been absent since his arrival. The German shepherd's breathing was steady, his eyes clear, and for the first time in months he seemed to believe that he was safe. But the 3 humans who'd become his protectors knew that safety was fragile, and that Clay's determination to destroy Rex ran deeper than simple grief. Outside, the corn grew tall in the summer heat, and the cicadas sang their ancient songs of survival. In Earl's garage, an unlikely family was forming around a dog who'd lost everything, but still managed to trust, still managed to love. The battle for Rex's life was just beginning, but at least now he wouldn't fight it alone. Martha pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for county clerk's office. Tomorrow, she would begin the search for truth, armed with nothing more than a teacher's stubborn refusal to accept easy answers and a grandmother's fierce protection of the innocent. "Don't you worry, boy," she whispered to Rex as his eyes drifted closed. "We're going to find out what really happened that night, and we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth." The Cedar County Courthouse stood like a monument to bureaucracy, its limestone facade weathered by a century of Iowa storms and small-town secrets. Martha climbed the worn steps with Bobby Ray beside her, both carrying the grim determination of people who'd run out of alternatives. The records clerk, a nervous young woman named Jennifer who'd graduated from Cedar Falls High just 3 years earlier, seemed overwhelmed by their request for the complete investigative file on Officer Thomas Hayes's fatal accident. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan, but those files are restricted," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Family members only. And even then, only with proper identification and a formal request process that takes at least 2 weeks. "Tommy Hayes was like a son to half this county," Martha replied, her teacher's voice carrying the kind of authority that had once made school board members reconsider budget cuts. "That boy ate Sunday dinner at my table more times than I can count." But bureaucracy proved immune to maternal affection, and they left the courthouse empty-handed, frustration weighing heavy on their shoulders. The drive back to Cedar Falls passed in silence, both lost in thoughts of legal dead ends and Clay's 48-hour ultimatum. It was Earl who provided the breakthrough, appearing at Martha's kitchen door that evening with a manila folder tucked under his arm and a grim smile on his weathered face. "Sometimes the direct approach isn't the only approach," he said, settling into Samuel's old chair at the kitchen table. "I called in a favor from my nephew Danny down in Des Moines. He's a state trooper, has access to the interagency database." The folder contained photocopies of the official accident report, witness statements, and a series of photographs that made Martha's stomach clench. Tommy's patrol car wrapped around an ancient oak tree, the driver's side crushed beyond recognition, emergency lights still flashing in the dawn light like Christmas decorations at a funeral. Weather was clear that night, Earl read from the report. No precipitation, good visibility, road conditions normal. Tommy was pursuing a stolen vehicle when he lost control on Highway 34, approximately 2 miles east of town. Bobby studied the photographs with clinical detachment, his veterinarian's training allowing him to compartmentalize the emotional impact. Where's Rex in these pictures? If he was in the car during the accident, there should be evidence. That's what's interesting. Earl flipped through several pages. No mention of the K-9 partner in the initial report. No indication that Rex was even present during the pursuit or the crash. Martha looked up from the witness statements, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. According to this, Clay was the one who found the wreck. Says he was driving home from work and saw the emergency lights. But look at the timestamp. The accident happened at 2:47 a.m. What was Clay doing out that late on a Tuesday night? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implication. Earl consulted his own copy of the timeline, cross-referencing the official report with supplementary documents Danny had managed to acquire. Clay's statement says he was coming home from Mick's Tavern in Waterloo. Bartender confirmed he was there until closing time at 2 a.m. 40-minute drive from Mick's to the accident site, Bobby calculated. Timeline works barely, but it's awfully convenient that he happened to be the first person on scene. They spread the documents across Martha's kitchen table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, searching for inconsistencies in the official narrative. The deeper they dug, the more questions arose. Why was there no mention of Rex in the initial report when every K-9 unit protocol required the dog to accompany his handler on all calls? Why did Clay's statement include so many specific details about Tommy's driving behavior when the crash occurred on a remote stretch of highway with no other witnesses? There's something else, Earl said quietly, producing a final document from the folder. Danny managed to get a copy of the dispatch logs from that night. Tommy wasn't responding to a stolen vehicle report. He was investigating a domestic disturbance call on Elm Street, 3 blocks from your house, Martha. The revelation struck like lightning. Martha's neighborhood was a quiet collection of elderly residents and young families, the kind of place where domestic disturbances were rare and usually involved nothing more serious than arguments over property lines or barking dogs. What kind of domestic call would require a K-9 unit at nearly 3 in the morning? The address, Bobby leaned over his mother's shoulder, studying the dispatch log, 1247 Elm Street. That's the old Morrison place, isn't it? Been empty since Pete Morrison moved to the nursing home. Martha nodded slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to shift into focus. But Clay's been doing maintenance work on that property. Has a key, comes and goes as he pleases. Pete Morrison's his uncle on his mother's side. The implications were staggering. If Tommy had been responding to a call at a property where Clay had legitimate access, if Rex had been present during whatever altercation led to that call, if Clay had somehow been involved in the events that sent Tommy racing through the night toward his death, then everything they'd been told about the accident was a carefully constructed lie. "We need to see that house," Bobby said, his voice tight with growing anger. If there's evidence of what really happened that night, it might still be there. But their plans were interrupted by the sound of vehicles in Martha's driveway. Multiple engines, doors slamming, official voices carrying the weight of legal authority. Through the kitchen window, they could see Clay's pickup truck accompanied by a county sheriff's cruiser and Dale Morrison's animal control van. "He's not waiting for the 48 hours, Earl observed grimly, moving to the window for a better view. Brought back up this time, too. Sheriff Patricia Wells had known Martha Sullivan for 30 years, had been taught by her in 3rd grade back when Cedar Falls Elementary still had wooden desks and chalkboards, but professional duty overrode personal history as she approached the front door with an official warrant and an expression of reluctant determination. "Martha, I'm sorry about this," Sheriff Wells said, her uniform crisp despite the evening heat. "But I've got a court order for the seizure and impoundment of a German Shepherd described as dangerous and unlicensed. Says here the animal's being harbored unlawfully on these premises." "That dog isn't here," Martha said truthfully, grateful that Rex was still safely hidden in Earl's garage. And he's not dangerous. That's a lie being spread by someone with his own agenda. Clay pushed forward, his face flushed with righteous anger. My brother's blood is on that animal's conscience if dogs have such things. I won't let him hurt anyone else in this town. Your brother's blood is on someone's conscience, Earl said quietly, stepping onto the porch with the manila folder tucked under his arm. But maybe not the one you think. The old veteran's words carried enough weight to give Sheriff Wells pause. She'd known Earl Mackenzie since childhood, knew him as a man who chose his words carefully and never spoke without good reason. What are you saying, Earl? I'm saying maybe it's time someone asked the right questions about what happened that night, Earl replied, holding up the folder. Questions about why Tommy was responding to a call at a house where his brother had keys, questions about why there's no mention of Rex in the initial accident report, questions about convenient timing and selective memory. Clay's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions like a man caught in a lie. You're talking nonsense, old man. Grief and age have addled your brain. Have they? Earl opened the folder, revealing the dispatch logs and timeline discrepancies. Because according to these official documents, your story doesn't add up. And when stories don't add up, smart people start wondering what really happened. Sheriff Wells studied the documents with growing interest, her professional instincts overriding the political pressure that had generated the warrant. Where did you get these files, Earl? Legal channels. My nephew's a state trooper, has every right to request interagency cooperation on traffic fatalities. What he found raises some serious questions about the completeness of the initial investigation. The standoff stretched across Martha's front yard like a chess game, each side calculating their next move while the summer evening settled around them. Rex was safe, for now, hidden in Earl's garage, but the reprieve was temporary. Eventually, they would have to produce evidence strong enough to clear the German Shepherd's name and expose the truth about Tommy Hayes' death. I want to see that house, Sheriff Wells said finally, her decision cutting through the tension like a blade. The Morrison place on Elm Street. If there's evidence related to this case, it needs to be properly examined. Clay's protest came too quickly, too desperately. There's nothing there. Just an empty house that needs maintenance. I've got legitimate business being there. Then you won't mind if we take a look, Sheriff Wells replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. Dale, secure that warrant. We're expanding this investigation beyond animal control. As the official vehicles pulled away from Martha's driveway, heading toward Elm Street and whatever secrets the Morrison house might hold, Earl allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Truth had a way of surfacing when good people refused to let it stay buried, and tonight might finally bring justice for both Tommy Hayes and the loyal partner who'd survived to tell his story. The Morrison house squatted like a guilty secret at the end of Elm Street, its white paint peeling and porch sagging under the weight of neglect. Sheriff Wells led the procession up the broken walkway, her flashlight cutting through the gathering dusk as Clay fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling with what he claimed was indignation, but looked suspiciously like fear. Inside, the house reeked of stale beer and cigarettes, a smell that seemed wrong for a property that was supposedly empty. Sheriff Wells' flashlight revealed scattered takeout containers, empty bottles and ashtrays overflowing with butts, evidence of recent occupation that contradicted Clay's claims of simple maintenance visits. Looks like someone's been living here, Martha observed, her teacher's eye cataloging the domestic debris with practiced efficiency, or at least spending considerable time here. Clay's explanation came too quickly, words tumbling over each other in his haste to deflect suspicion. Sometimes I crash here after working late, easier than driving home when I've had a beer or two. Uncle Pete said it was fine, helps keep an eye on the place. But Sheriff Wells had moved beyond the living room, following a trail of disturbance that led toward the back of the house. In the kitchen, cabinet doors hung open, revealing empty shelves and water damage from a leaking pipe that had obviously been ignored for months. The back door showed fresh scratches around the lock, as if someone had broken in recently. Or broken out. "Patricia?" Earl's voice carried a note of urgency that made everyone turn. The old veteran stood in the doorway to what had once been Pete Morrison's workshop, his flashlight illuminating something that made Martha gasp and Bobby Ray curse under his breath. Chains, heavy industrial-grade chains bolted to the concrete floor, with metal bowls positioned nearby and straw scattered around like bedding for an animal. The walls bore scratches at dog height, desperate gouges in the drywall that spoke of panic and confinement. In the corner, a police radio crackled with static, its antenna broken and display dark. "What the hell is this, Clay?" Sheriff Wells' voice had gone cold, professional, carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. "This looks like you've been keeping something chained up down here." "I don't know anything about that," Clay's voice cracked, his earlier bluster evaporating like smoke. "Could be from when Uncle Pete had his hunting dogs, could be from years ago." But Bobby Ray was already kneeling beside the chains, his veterinarian's training allowing him to read the story written in metal and fear. "These scratches are fresh, and this—" he held up a tuft of black and tan fur caught on one of the chain links. "This is German Shepherd hair. Rex was here." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Rex hadn't simply wandered away after Tommy's accident. He'd been imprisoned here, chained in this basement while the town searched for him, while Clay spread lies about his involvement in Tommy's death. The metal bowls showed water stains but no food residue, suggesting that someone had kept the dog alive but barely fed, systematically starving him while maintaining the fiction that he'd simply vanished. "You son of a bitch!" Bobby Ray rose to his feet, his hands clenched into fists. "You kept him prisoner. You tortured him." "I didn't torture anyone." Clay's voice rose to a near shout, desperation finally cracking his carefully maintained facade. "That dog killed my brother. He deserved worse than he got." "How?" Martha's question cut through Clay's rage like a blade. "How exactly did Rex kill Tommy? Because according to these dispatch logs, your brother was responding to a domestic disturbance at this address." "What kind of domestic disturbance requires a K-9 unit at 3 in the morning, Clay?" Sheriff Wells was already on her radio, calling for backup and a crime scene investigation unit. The basement had become evidence in what was clearly a larger crime, and she needed proper documentation before anyone contaminated the scene further. But Clay's composure was disintegrating, 8 months of guilt and lies finally overwhelming his ability to maintain the deception. "You don't understand. Tommy wasn't supposed to come here. I called in a noise complaint to get him away from downtown, away from the real action. But he brought that damn dog and everything went wrong." "What real action?" Earl's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd interrogated enemy soldiers, patient and relentless in pursuit of truth. "What were you trying to hide from your brother?" The answer came in fragments, torn from Clay by the weight of his own guilt and the undeniable evidence surrounding them. He'd been running a poker game in the Morrison house basement, illegal gambling that attracted players from 3 counties and generated enough cash to pay off his mounting debts. Tommy had been getting suspicious, asking questions about Clay's sudden financial recovery after years of struggling to keep his garage afloat. "I just needed him distracted for one night." Clay's voice broke, tears streaming down his face. "One more game to win back what I'd lost. But he showed up here instead of going to the fake address I gave dispatch, found us right in the middle of the biggest pot of the year." The confrontation had escalated quickly. Tommy, duty-bound and honest to a fault, couldn't ignore evidence of illegal gambling, even when his own brother was involved. Rex had sensed the tension, positioning himself between the brothers as their argument grew heated. When Clay tried to grab the radio to prevent Tommy from calling for backup, Rex had intervened, not aggressively but protectively, causing Clay to stumble backward into a table covered with gambling proceeds. "Tommy was trying to arrest me," Clay continued, his voice hollow with shame. "His own brother. Can you believe that? So rigid, so by the book, he couldn't even give family a break. When Rex got between us, I shoved him away just trying to get to the radio, but Tommy went crazy, said I'd hurt his partner, started reaching for his service weapon. That's when everything went wrong. Tommy had Rex loaded into the patrol car and was radioing for backup when Clay, desperate to avoid arrest and the certain loss of his business, had grabbed his own truck keys and given chase. The pursuit through the dark highways of Cedar County had ended when Clay, drunk on desperation and fear, had used his larger vehicle to force Tommy's cruiser off the road. "I never meant for him to die," Clay sobbed, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I just wanted him to listen, to understand that family should protect family. But when I saw the car wrapped around that tree, saw what I'd done." The rest of the story emerged like poison from an infected wound. Clay had pulled Tommy's body from the wreckage, but Tommy was already gone, his neck broken in the impact. Rex had survived, trapped but conscious in the back seat, whimpering over his fallen partner. Instead of calling for help, instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Clay had made a choice that revealed the true depth of his cowardice. He'd loaded the traumatized German Shepherd into his truck and brought him here, to this basement prison where Rex would spend the next 8 months slowly starving, while Clay constructed an elaborate lie about the dog's role in Tommy's death. Every day, Clay had fed Rex just enough to keep him alive, punishing the innocent animal for witnessing his crime while using that same animal as a scapegoat for his own guilt. The truth hung in the basement air like smoke, choking and undeniable. Tommy Hayes had died protecting his K-9 partner from his own brother's violence, and Rex had survived to carry both the trauma of that night and the undeserved blame for his partner's death. The arrest of Clayton Hayes sent shockwaves through Cedar Falls that reverberated far beyond the boundaries of the small Iowa town. Within hours, news vans from Des Moines and Cedar Rapids lined Main Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers as reporters chased the story of corruption, cover-up, and the loyal K-9 who'd been scapegoated for his handler's murder. But for Rex, vindication came with a price that seemed almost too heavy to bear. Earl found him in the corner of the garage 3 days after Clay's confession, refusing food and water, his intelligent eyes clouded with a depression so profound it seemed to reach into his very soul. The German Shepherd had survived 8 months of imprisonment and starvation, but learning the truth about Tommy's death appeared to be breaking him in ways that physical abuse never could. "He knows," Bobby Ray said quietly, kneeling beside the dog who'd once been the pride of the Cedar County Sheriff's Department. "Somehow he understands that Tommy died trying to protect him, and he can't forgive himself for surviving." Martha sat on her milk crate, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she watched Rex's labored breathing. The dog who'd shown such resilience, such determination to survive against impossible odds, was simply giving up. His tail hadn't wagged since Clay's confession, and he flinched away from any attempt at comfort as if he didn't deserve kindness. "In Vietnam," Earl said slowly, his arthritic hands working carefully on a small wooden dog he'd been carving. "We had a saying about survivor's guilt. The good ones always think they should have done more. Rex doesn't understand that he was just doing his job, being loyal. All he knows is that his partner is dead and he's alive, and in his mind, that makes him guilty of something." The local veterinarian from Waterloo had examined Rex thoroughly, finding no physical reason for his decline. His wounds had healed, his weight had stabilized, and his blood work showed normal values across the board. But the dog's spirit seemed broken beyond repair. as if the revelation of Tommy's sacrifice had shattered something essential in his canine heart. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a veterinary psychiatrist from Iowa State University, drove down specifically to evaluate Rex's condition. Her diagnosis was grim but not surprising. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder complicated by what she termed moral injury, a psychological wound that occurred when someone witnessed or was forced to participate in events that violated their fundamental sense of right and wrong. Military and police dogs are trained to protect their handlers above all else, Dr. Walsh explained to the small group gathered in Earl's garage. Rex's entire identity was built around keeping Tommy safe. When Tommy died protecting him instead of the other way around, it created a cognitive dissonance that his mind simply can't resolve. The treatment options were limited. Antidepressants might help with the chemical aspects of his depression, but addressing the psychological trauma would require time, patience, and something that couldn't be prescribed, a reason to believe that his life still had value and purpose. What he needs, Dr. Walsh concluded, is to save someone else, to experience being the protector again instead of the protected. Until he can prove to himself that he's still capable of doing good in the world, he's going to continue this slow decline toward death. But opportunities for heroism don't schedule themselves around therapeutic needs, and Rex continued his downward spiral through the hot August days. He lost weight again, his ribs beginning to show through his coat as he refused most attempts at feeding. The town that had once feared him now watched his decline with growing concern, many residents stopping by Earl's garage to offer encouragement to a dog who seemed beyond the reach of human comfort. It was Martha who noticed the change first, on a sweltering Thursday morning when the heat index topped 100 degrees and the air conditioning in the courthouse had failed yet again. She'd been visiting Rex as usual, reading to him from the newspaper in her gentle teacher's voice, when his ears suddenly perked up at a sound only he could hear. Outside, Mrs. Henderson was calling frantically for her 5-year-old grandson, little Michael, who'd been playing in her backyard when she'd gone inside to answer the phone. The boy had vanished in the 15 minutes she'd been distracted, leaving behind only his tricycle and a sandbox half-finished castle. Rex rose to his feet for the first time in days, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air currents flowing through the garage door. Something had awakened the canine officer that had been dormant beneath months of trauma and guilt. Some instinct stronger than grief that recognized a child in danger. "Find him, boy," Martha whispered, her voice thick with hope and desperation. "Show us what Tommy taught you." The transformation was immediate and miraculous. Rex's training kicked in like muscle memory, his nose dropping to the ground as he began working the scent trail that would lead him to Michael Henderson. His movements were still careful, his body still weak from his ordeal, but his eyes held the focused intensity of a working dog with a mission to complete. Bobby Ray and Earl followed at a distance as Rex led them through the neighborhood, past the Henderson house and toward the old grain elevator that dominated Cedar Falls's skyline. The massive structure had been abandoned for a decade, its doors supposedly secured against unauthorized entry, but children had a way of finding gaps that adults missed. Rex's whines grew more urgent as they approached the elevator, his nose working the metal siding until he located a loose panel that had been pushed aside just enough to admit a curious 5-year-old. Inside, the building was a maze of machinery, conveyor belts, and grain chutes that created perfect hiding places for an exploring child, and perfect death traps if that child became lost or frightened. "Michael!" Bobby Ray called, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Michael Henderson, can you hear me?" The answering cry was faint, muffled by distance and the acoustic dampening of old grain dust. But Rex's ears swiveled toward the sound, like radar dishes. He led them deeper into the building, past rusted equipment and up a series of catwalks that groaned under their weight, following a scent trail invisible to human senses. They found Michael on the third floor, trapped behind a collapsed section of conveyor belt that had fallen when he'd tried to climb on it. The boy was scared but uninjured, his tear-streaked face brightening when he saw Rex approaching through the maze of machinery. "Doggy!" Michael reached out with the fearless affection of childhood, and Rex gently licked the boy's face while Bobby Ray and Earl worked to move the heavy metal debris. The rescue took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering, but Rex never left Michael's side, providing comfort and reassurance to a frightened child while the adults freed him from his mechanical prison. When they finally emerged from the grain elevator, Michael riding on Bobby Ray's shoulders while Rex trotted beside them with his tail held high, a crowd had gathered that included half the town and 3 more news crews. But the cameras and questions didn't matter to Rex. For the first time since Tommy's death, he'd done what he was born to do. He'd saved someone who needed saving. The depression that had nearly killed him lifted like fog in the morning sun, replaced by something precious and rare, the knowledge that his life still had meaning. That evening, as Rex accepted his first full meal in days and allowed Martha to brush his coat while Earl worked on his carving, Dr. Walsh called with results from his latest blood work. The stress hormones that had been slowly poisoning his system were returning to normal levels, and his appetite had triggered a cascade of healing chemistry that suggested a full recovery was not only possible, but probable. "He found his purpose again," she told Martha over the phone. "Sometimes that's the only medicine that really works. The chance to be useful, to matter, to make a difference in someone else's life." Outside, the corn grew tall in the late summer heat, and the cicadas sang their ancient songs of survival and renewal. Inside Earl's garage, a German shepherd who'd been written off as dangerous, blamed for a crime he didn't commit, and nearly died from grief, was finally allowing himself to believe that tomorrow might be worth living for. The healing had begun, not just for Rex, but for a town that had learned the difference between truth and convenient fiction, between justice and revenge, between giving up and holding on to hope. 1 year later, the autumn sun painted Cedar Falls in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the newly dedicated Earl Mackenzie Memorial Park, where children's laughter mingled with the gentle rustle of falling leaves. Rex lay contentedly in the shade of an oak tree, his coat glossy with health, watching as a group of kindergartners from Martha's old school practiced their letters on clipboards while their teacher praised their efforts. The German shepherd had filled out to his proper weight, his intelligent eyes clear and bright, no longer haunted by the ghosts of that terrible night 14 months ago. His transformation from the skeletal creature who'd collapsed on Main Street to the confident therapy dog he'd become seemed miraculous to those who remembered his darkest days. But to Martha, it felt like the natural result of love, patience, and the healing power of purpose. "Rex, come," called Sarah Peterson, the new canine trainer who drove down from Des Moines twice a week to work with the Cedar Falls Police Department's expanding canine program. Rex immediately responded, his training as sharp as ever despite his transition from law enforcement to therapy work. The department had officially retired him with full honors, but his expertise was still valued in training younger dogs and handlers. Bobby Ray watched from the park bench where he'd been reading the morning paper, a smile crossing his face as he observed his mother's interaction with the children. Martha had volunteered to help with the reading program, her natural teaching instincts undimmed by retirement, and Rex had become an unofficial assistant, providing calm companionship to children who struggled with anxiety or attention issues. The veterinary clinic Bobby Ray had opened on Main Street was thriving, its waiting room often occupied by clients who came as much for Rex's therapeutic presence as for medical care. The German Shepherd seemed to understand which animals needed comfort and which humans required reassurance, positioning himself exactly where he was needed most during difficult procedures or emotional goodbyes. Dr. Whitman? Jennifer Walsh from the Iowa State Veterinary Psychology Program approached the bench, her research folder tucked under her arm. She'd been documenting Rex's recovery for a case study on PTSD treatment in working dogs, and his progress had exceeded even her most optimistic projections. "How's our success story today?" she asked, settling beside Bobby Ray as they watched Rex demonstrate proper search techniques for a group of visiting high school students interested in law enforcement careers. "Better than I ever imagined possible," Bobby Ray replied honestly. "Some mornings I watch him playing with the kids or helping calm an anxious pet, and I can hardly believe he's the same dog we found dying on Main Street." Dr. Walsh made notes in her folder, documenting another positive observation for her research. Rex's case had become something of a legend in veterinary psychology circles, proof that even the most severe trauma could be overcome with proper care and the opportunity to rediscover purpose. She'd been invited to present their findings at conferences across the country, sharing Rex's story as a beacon of hope for other animals suffering from similar psychological wounds. Across the park, Earl's nephew Danny approached with his own German Shepherd puppy, a 10-week-old ball of energy named Scout, who was destined for K-9 training with the state police. Rex immediately assumed his mentoring role, demonstrating calm behavior while the puppy learned basic commands and socialization skills. The sight of the grizzled veteran patiently teaching the next generation brought tears to Martha's eyes, remembering how far they'd all come since those dark days of August. Earl's absence was still felt keenly, especially during moments like these when his wisdom and quiet strength would have added depth to their joy. The old veteran had passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after Rex's rescue of Michael Henderson, his cancer finally claiming a body that had endured more than its share of battles. But his legacy lived on in the memorial park, in the workshop tools he'd left to Bobby Ray, and in the small wooden cross he'd carved for Tommy Hayes's grave, where Rex still visited weekly to pay his respects. Clay Hayes remained incarcerated at the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison, serving a 15-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and animal cruelty. His confession had spared the town the trauma of a lengthy trial, but the ripple effects of his actions continued to influence how Cedar Falls approached trust, forgiveness, and the complex nature of family loyalty. Some residents had written to him offering support for his eventual rehabilitation, while others maintained that his betrayal of both his brother and the community was unforgivable. Martha had been among those who'd sent letters, not out of forgiveness for his crimes, but from a teacher's understanding that education and reflection were essential components of genuine redemption. Clay's responses had been brief and humble, acknowledging the magnitude of his failures while expressing genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused. Whether that remorse would translate into meaningful change remained to be seen, but Martha believed in the possibility of human transformation, even under the darkest circumstances. The legal resolution of Tommy's case had brought some closure to the community, but the real healing had come from watching Rex reclaim his life and purpose. The German Shepherd had become a symbol of resilience and second chances, proof that loyalty and love could survive even the most devastating betrayals. His weekly visits to the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Waterloo had expanded into a formal therapy program, bringing comfort to combat veterans who recognized a kindred spirit in the dog who'd survived his own war. Mrs. Sullivan, called Linda Morrison, Pete Morrison's daughter, who'd driven down from Cedar Rapids to visit her father's old house. The property had been sold to a young family from Chicago, urban refugees seeking small-town safety for their children, and Linda had come to retrieve the last of her family's belongings. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did." Dad would have been horrified to know what Clay was doing in his basement. Martha accepted the gratitude gracefully, though she still struggled with the complexity of emotions surrounding the Morrison house. The new owners had completely renovated the basement, erasing all traces of Rex's imprisonment and transforming the space into a cheerful playroom for their twin daughters. Sometimes she wondered if they'd been right to preserve such a painful history, but Bobby Ray had convinced her that healing required acknowledgement, not erasure. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, the park gradually emptied of visitors, leaving just the core group who'd gathered there most evenings since the memorial's dedication. Rex settled beside Martha's bench, his head resting on her lap while she stroked his ears with the same gentle touch she'd once used to comfort nervous third-graders. "You know what I've learned this year?" Martha said, addressing Bobby Ray but speaking loud enough for the others to hear. "Sometimes what we think we're saving ends up saving us instead." Bobby Ray nodded, understanding the layers of meaning in his mother's words. His return to Cedar Falls had healed more than just Rex. It had mended the rift between mother and son that had festered for 15 years, replacing resentment with understanding and distance with genuine affection. The veterinary practice had given him professional fulfillment, but his relationships with Martha and the community had provided something more valuable, a sense of belonging and purpose that had been missing from his life in Springfield. Dr. Walsh gathered her research materials as the shadows lengthened, her documentation of Rex's recovery nearly complete. "I'll be presenting your case at the International Conference on Animal Psychology next month," she told them. "Rex's story is going to help a lot of other animals, and probably their humans too." As the group began to disperse, Rex rose and walked to the memorial plaque that bore Earl's name and a simple inscription. "Some measure courage by the battles fought, others by the kindness shown." The German Shepherd sat quietly beside the bronze marker, his vigil a daily reminder that loyalty transcended death and that love persisted even after loss. Martha watched her unlikely family prepare to head home. Bobby Ray to his apartment above the clinic, Dr. Walsh to her hotel in Waterloo, the others to their own evening routines. But Rex would come with her, as he had every night for the past year, sleeping on the bed that Samuel had shared and providing the companionship that made an empty house feel like a home again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Another group of children to comfort, another veteran to encourage, another chance to prove that healing was possible and that second chances could transform lives in ways no one could predict. Rex had taught them all that survival wasn't just about enduring pain. It was about finding the courage to trust again, to love again, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Martha's hand resting lightly on Rex's head, the German Shepherd's tail wagged with the contentment of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged and why his life mattered. The boy who'd wandered in misery, skin, and bones had become a symbol of hope for an entire community, proof that even the darkest stories could have happy endings if enough people cared enough to fight for them. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet courage of ordinary people who refuse to give up on what matters. Rex's journey from a broken, starving soul to a beacon of hope reminds us that it's never too late for second chances. Not for a loyal German Shepherd, not for a grieving mother and her estranged son, and certainly not for any of us who've weathered our own storms. In a world that often feels divided and harsh, Cedar Falls discovered what we all need to remember: that love, patience, and unwavering faith can heal even the deepest wounds. Martha's determination to seek truth, Bobby Ray's courage to come home, and Earl's gentle wisdom prove that when we stand together, we can overcome betrayal, loss, and seemingly impossible odds. Rex didn't just survive his nightmare. He transformed it into purpose, becoming exactly what his community needed: living proof that loyalty endures, that family extends beyond blood, and that every ending can become a new beginning. His wagging tail in Earl Mackenzie Memorial Park whispers the same message to all of us. You are valued, you are loved, and your story isn't over yet. What moment in your own life taught you that it's never too late for a fresh start? Have you ever experienced an unexpected friendship that changed everything? Share your story below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.